Corporal Eli Vance had not planned to become the most important human in 6-star systems. But life had a funny way of ruining plans. And his life had been no exception to that rule since the day he fixed that damn gauntlet in a spaceport. Bar 3 months ago, he remembered the moment clearly. Sitting alone at a grimy counter on Station Theta 9, nursing a drink that tasted like engine coolant mixed with regret, when the karate diplomat had walked in with a broken heirloom gauntlet hanging limp from his wrist. And every mechanic in the place had refused to touch it because karate armor was sacred. Living metal that rejected foreign hands, but Eli had been drunk enough to be brave and curious enough to be stupid. So when the diplomat sat down beside him and cursed in 3 languages about finding no one who could help, Ali had simply reached over and said, "Let me take a look." The metal had been warm under his fingers, almost alive. And something in his brain had clicked into place like a key, turning in a lock he never knew existed. And within 20 minutes, the gauntlet was flexing and moving like new. The diplomat had stared at him with those copper-colored eyes wide as moons. And 3 days later, Eli found himself aboard the karate Dominion warship called the Void Serpent. Not as a prisoner exactly, but not as a free man either. They called him a cultural exchange specialist, which was a polite way of saying they owned him now. The karate were terrifying in ways that human nightmares could barely imagine. Standing 8 feet tall with scales that shifted from deep purple to black depending on the light. 4 arms that could tear a man apart as easily as paper. And eyes like pools of molten copper that seemed to look straight through flesh and into the soul. They were warriors above all else. Proud and fierce and bound by codes of honor so complex that Eli had given up trying to understand them after the first week. But he understood one thing perfectly well. Their armor was everything to them. Karate battleplate was not made but grown. A symbiotic metal that bonded with its wearer from birth and became part of their very identity. Passed down through bloodlines and carrying the memories of every ancestor who had worn it before. And to have damaged armor was a shame worse than death itself. The problem was that the karate had lost the art of mending this armor centuries ago, when the last of their forged priests had died in a great war and taken their secrets to the grave. So for generations, the proud warriors had been forced to hide their damaged plate or live with the shame of cracks and scars that could never heal until Eli came along with his strange human hands that could somehow speak to the living metal. He worked in a cramped workshop deep in the belly of the ship. Surrounded by tools, he modified himself and watched constantly by guards who did not trust him but could not deny that he was useful. And day after day, karate warriors would come to him in secret, their heads bowed with shame as they revealed the damage they had hidden for years. Eli fixed them all, one by one, asking no questions and keeping all secrets. And slowly the suspicion in those copper eyes began to change into something else. Something that might have been respect if karate were capable of respecting humans. He had settled into a routine, waking early, working late, eating alone in his quarters, and trying not to think about Earth or his family or the life he had left behind. When everything changed on a night that started like any other, the workshop door slid open with a hiss of hydraulics, and Eli looked up from the gauntlet he was mending, expecting to see another shame-faced warrior with a crack to hide. But instead he saw her commander Sathra Valkes, first blade of the Void Serpent, stood in his doorway like a statue carved from obsidian and fury. She was tall even for a karate, nearly 9 feet of scaled muscle and barely contained violence. Her forearms crossed over her chest in a way that suggested she was holding herself back from killing something. And her eyes burned with a light that made Eli's survival instincts scream at him to run. He did not run, because there was nowhere to go, and because he had learned that showing fear to karate only made them angrier. So instead he set down his tools and waited. "Human," she said, and her voice was like gravel being crushed under tank treads, deep and rough and carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You will fix something for me. "That is what I do, Commander," Eli replied, keeping his voice steady even though his heart was pounding so hard. He was sure she could hear it. "What needs mending?" She stared at him for a long moment, and he saw something flicker in those molten eyes. Something that looked almost like hesitation, which was strange because he had heard that the First Blade feared nothing and hesitated for no one. Then she uncrossed her arms, and Eli saw the damage her chest armor. The sacred plate that covered her hearts was cracked straight down the center. A jagged line that ran from her throat to her stomach like a frozen lightning bolt. And the metal around it was dark and cold in a way that healthy karate armor never was. This was not just damage. Eli realized with a cold shock this was devastation. The kind of wound that would have destroyed any other warrior standing in karate society. And the fact that she had hidden it meant that no one else on this ship knew she was trusting him with her deepest shame. And they both knew it. "You will fix this," she said again. And this time her voice carried an edge of something that was not quite threat and not quite plea. "You will speak of its damage to no one. Not to the crew, not to the other warriors, not to anyone who breathes. Or I will end you myself. Do you understand?" Eli looked at the crack, then at her face, then back at the crack again. "I understand," he said quietly. "When do we start?" "Now," she replied, and stepped into his workshop, letting the door slide shut behind her with a sound like a tomb ceiling closed. And in that moment, Eli Vance had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. All because of a broken piece of armor and the fierce warrior who wore it. The first session was awkward in ways that Eli had not expected, because working on karate armor was nothing like fixing machines back on Earth. Nothing like welding broken pipes or replacing worn gears. And everything like trying to have a conversation with something that did not speak in words. Commander. Sathra sat on the metal bench in his workshop with her back straight as a blade and her forearms held stiffly at her sides, watching him with those burning copper eyes as he approached. And he could see the tension in every line of her body. The barely controlled urge to strike at anything that came too close. "I need to touch the armor directly," Eli said, keeping his voice calm and soft like he was approaching a wild animal. "The metal responds to contact, to warmth, to intention. And I cannot work through gloves or tools alone." She said nothing, but her jaw tightened in a way that told him everything he needed to know about how she felt about being touched by a human. "If you have another way you would prefer," he began. But she cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Do what you must," she growled. "Get it done." So Eli stepped forward and placed his palms against her cracked chest plate. And the moment his skin made contact with the living metal, something extraordinary happened. The armor sighed. It was not a sound exactly. More like a vibration that traveled through his hands and up his arms and into his chest. A feeling of release and relief that seemed to come from the metal itself, and Sathra went completely still, her eyes widening in what looked like shock. "What did you do?" she demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Nothing yet," Eli replied, equally surprised. "I just touched it. That is all." He had worked on many pieces of karate armor in the past 3 months, but none of them had ever responded like this, with such immediate and powerful recognition. And he wondered what made hers different. The answer came to him slowly as he began to work, his fingers tracing the edges of the crack and feeling the metal's texture change beneath his touch. Because this armor was old, incredibly old, carrying the weight of generations within its living structure. And it had been so long since anyone had truly touched it with the intent to heal. "The metal can feel your emotions," Eli murmured, not looking up from his work. "It is connected to you, bonded to your nervous system, and right now it can feel how tense you are, how much you are fighting against this." "I am not fighting anything," Sathra said through clenched teeth. "You are holding your breath," he pointed out gently. "Your muscles are locked, your hearts are racing. I can feel all of it through the armor, and the metal is responding by tensing up too, which makes it harder to mend. She was silent for a moment, and he could feel her pride warring with her need, her hatred of showing weakness, battling against her desperate desire to be whole again. "What would you have me do?" she finally asked, and the question seemed to cost her greatly. "Relax," Eli said simply. "I know that karate do not relax. I have heard that from every warrior who has sat in that chair. But the armor does not care about karate pride. It only cares about you, and if you want it to heal, you need to let go of whatever you are holding on to." "You speak as if you understand the armor better than I do." "I do not understand it at all," Eli admitted. "I only know what I feel when I touch it, what it tells me through my hands. And right now, it is telling me that you are carrying something heavy. Something that goes beyond physical damage." The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled tight, and Eli continued to work, his fingers coaxing the edges of the crack to soften and remember their original shape. And slowly, gradually, he felt something change as Ithra's breathing deepened. Her muscles loosened just a fraction, and the metal beneath his hands grew warmer. "Think of something that brings you peace," Eli suggested. "Something that has nothing to do with war or duty or honor. Something from before you became the first blade." "There is nothing," she said immediately. "There is always something," he countered. "No one is born a warrior, Commander. Somewhere in your past there is a memory of being something else. Something softer, and I need you to find it. More silence." And Eli thought she would refuse, would stand up and leave and maybe throw him out an airlock for his presumption. But instead she spoke, and her voice was different somehow. "Younger and far away, there is a lake on my homeworld," she said slowly, as if pulling the words from somewhere deep and hidden. "The water is black as the void between stars. And when I was a child, before my training began, I would swim there at night when no one was watching." The metal warmed further under his hands, and Eli smiled even though she could not see it. "Tell me more," he said. "The lake was filled with bioluminescent eels," she continued. And now her voice had taken on a dreamy quality that seemed completely wrong coming from someone so fierce. "They would rise to the surface at night, glowing blue and green, and I would float on my back and watch them spiral around me like living stars." The crack beneath Eli's fingers began to soften, the edges losing their sharp, angry quality and becoming almost fluid, and he pressed gently, encouraging the metal to flow back together. "That sounds beautiful," he said. "It was," Saithra agreed. "I have not thought of it in many years. There has been no time for such memories. No room for softness in the life of a first blade. The armor remembers," Eli told her. "Even if you tried to forget, the armor kept that memory safe. And now it is using it to heal." She looked down at him then, and for the first time since she had walked into his workshop, her eyes held something other than anger or suspicion. Something that might have been wonder. "How do you do this?" she asked. "How do you speak to the metal as if it were alive?" "I do not know," Eli answered honestly. "Humans are not supposed to be able to do this. No one understands why I can. Maybe it is something in our hands. Something in the way we evolved to use tools and build things. Or maybe I am just a freak of nature." "You are strange," Saithra said. But it did not sound like an insult. "I have been called worse," Eli replied with a small smile. "Now close your eyes and think of those eels again. We have a lot of work to do, and the metal is finally starting to listen." She closed her eyes, and for the first time, Eli saw the commander without her mask. And he realized that beneath all that fury and pride was someone who had simply been broken for a very long time. The crack would not heal in one session, or even 10, but as the hours passed and the metal slowly remembered its shape, Eli began to understand that he was not just fixing armor, he was mending something much deeper. And he was not sure either of them was ready for where that would lead. Days turned into weeks, and Saithra kept returning to the workshop. always at night when the corridors were empty, always with that same mixture of pride and shame burning in her copper eyes. And Eli learned to read her moods through the temperature of her armor before she ever spoke a word. Crew had begun to whisper, because secrets on a warship were like water in cupped hands, impossible to hold for long, and though no one knew the true nature of Saithra's visits, everyone knew that the First Blade was spending time with the human. "They say you have bewitched me," Saithra told him one evening as he worked on a particularly stubborn section of the crack. "They say humans have strange powers of manipulation. That you have put some kind of spell on my mind to make me trust you. Have I?" Eli asked without looking up. "I do not know," she admitted, and there was something almost vulnerable in the way she said it. "I have never trusted anyone outside my bloodline, and even them I trusted only as far as honor demanded. But you are different somehow. Maybe it is not me," Eli suggested. "Maybe it is just the situation. You have been carrying this damage alone for so long. And now someone finally knows, and there is relief in that. Relief in not having to hide." She considered this for a moment, her forearms folded in her lap in a posture he had come to recognize as thoughtful. "Perhaps," she allowed. "Or perhaps humans really are as dangerous as the old stories say. Not because of your weapons or your numbers, but because you make others feel things they should not feel." Eli smiled at that, because it was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever received from a karate, and returned his attention to the crack. It was healing well, the edges growing closer together with each session, but there was a spot near the center that refused to change. A cold hard knot of metal that rejected his touch no matter how patient he was. And he had been putting off asking about it because he knew the answer would not be easy tonight. He decided it was time to ask. "The crack is closing," he said carefully, "but there is something in the middle that will not heal. A place where the metal has gone cold and hard. And I think you know what it is." Saithra went very still, and the armor under his hands chilled so suddenly that he had to pull back. "I do not wish to speak of it," she said, and her voice had gone flat and dangerous. "I know," Eli replied gently, "but the armor does not care what you wish. It only cares what you need. And right now, it needs you to let go of whatever happened here. You do not understand what you are asking. Then help me understand," he said, "because I cannot fix this without knowing what broke it in the first place. The metal is holding on to something, a memory, a trauma, and it will not release it unless you do." The silence stretched so long that Eli thought she would leave, would walk out and never come back, and he prepared himself for that possibility, for the loss of something he had not realized he valued until this moment. But she did not leave a blade, she finally said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "That is what made the crack, a karate blade, driven through my chest plate by someone I trusted completely." Eli said nothing, waiting for her to continue. Her name was Voltara. Saithra went on, each word seeming to cost her. "She was my second in command, my shield sister, bonded to me by oaths that should have been unbreakable. We fought together for 20 years, bled together, saved each other's lives more times than I can count." "What happened?" Eli asked softly. "Politics." Saithra spat the word like poison. "A rival house offered her power and position beyond anything I could give. And she accepted. She came to me in the night, pretending to seek counsel, and when my guard was down, she struck. Her hands clenched into fists, and the armor shuddered under Eli's touch. The blade went through my chest plate and into my primary heart." She continued, "I should have died. Any other karate would have died, but I did not. I turned and I fought, and I killed her with my bare hands, even as my blood poured out onto the floor. I am sorry," Eli said. "And he meant it. I survived," Saithra said bitterly. "But the armor did not truly. It has been cold ever since. Cold and cracked and carrying the memory of her betrayal like a wound that will not close." Eli understood now why the repair had been so difficult. Why the metal clung to its damage so fiercely? Because the armor was not just broken, it was traumatized. Holding on to the pain because letting go would mean accepting what had happened. The armor is protecting you, he said slowly, working through the idea as he spoke. It thinks that if it stays hard and cold in that spot, nothing can hurt you there again. It learned that vulnerability is dangerous, and it is trying to keep you safe the only way it knows how. Then it is futile, Sci-Fi said, because the damage is done. She is dead, and I am alive, and nothing will change that. But something can change, Eli insisted. You can change. You can choose to let go of the betrayal. Not to forget it or forgive it, but to stop letting it define you. To stop letting it keep you cold and closed off from everything else. She looked at him then. Really looked at him, and he saw something in her eyes that he had never seen before. Something raw and wounded and desperately hoping. How do you know such things? She asked. How can a human who has lived so few years understand what it is to carry such pain? Because humans break too, Eli said simply. We break all the time. We lose people we love. We are betrayed by those we trust. We make mistakes that cost us everything. But we also heal. We are very good at healing. Maybe because we are so fragile that we have had to learn. He placed his hands back on her armor, over the cold spot. And this time, he did not try to fix it. He simply held it, offering warmth without demand. You do not have to heal today, he told her. You do not have to heal tomorrow, but you have to believe that you can heal eventually. And the armor has to believe it too. She closed her eyes, and he felt the metal tremble beneath his palms. Felt the cold begin to soften just the smallest amount, and he knew that something had shifted. Something that might someday lead to real healing. They sat like that for a long time, human and karate, hands in armor. Neither of them speaking, because there was nothing left to say. The crack was still there when she left that night. But it was smaller, and the cold spot was just a little bit warmer than it had been before progress. Eli thought, as he cleaned his workshop, slow and painful progress, but progress all the same. The attack came at 3 in the morning, ship time, when the corridors were dark and quiet and most of the crew was deep in sleep. And Eli was awake only because he had developed a habit of working late. A habit born from too many restless nights spent thinking about things he should not be thinking about. He was adjusting a plasma welder when he heard the footsteps outside his door. Soft and careful in a way that normal footsteps never were. And something in his gut told him that those footsteps did not belong on Earth. Eli had learned to trust his gut, because his gut had saved his life more times than he could count. In back alleys and bad neighborhoods, and all the places where a mechanic from the wrong side of town learned to survive. So instead of opening his door, he pressed his ear against it and listened. 3 sets of footsteps, moving past his quarters toward the door at the end of the hall. The door that led to Sci-Fi's chambers, and he heard the soft click of weapons being drawn. The whisper of blades sliding from sheaths. Assassins. His heart began to pound. Fear and something else flooding through him. Something hot and urgent that he did not have time to examine. And he made a decision that would either save a life or end his own. He grabbed the plasma welder in one hand and a canister of compressed hydrogen in the other. Tools that were never meant to be weapons, but could become weapons in the hands of someone desperate enough. And he slipped out of his quarters into the dark corridor. The assassins did not see him coming. They were karate. All 3 of them, their scales painted with the marks of House Volkes. Sci-Fi's own warriors turned traitor. And they were so focused on their target that they never considered that anyone else might be awake. The first one fell when Eli jammed the plasma welder against the gap in his neck armor and pulled the trigger, sending a stream of superheated plasma into flesh and bone. And the assassin's scream was cut short as he collapsed. The second one turned, startled by the sound, and Eli threw the hydrogen canister at his face, then ignited it with a spark from the welder, and the explosion was small but fierce. enough to blind and burn and send the assassin staggering backward into the wall. But the third one was fast. Faster than Eli could follow, and before he could react, there were claws around his throat, piercing through skin and drawing blood. "Stupid human," the assassin hissed, lifting Eli off the ground like he weighed nothing. "Did you think you could stop us with your pathetic toys?" Eli could not breathe, could not speak, could only claw uselessly at the hand crushing his windpipe while spots danced in his vision. And he thought, this is it. This is how I die. In a dark corridor on an alien ship. And no one will ever know then. The door at the end of the hall exploded outward. Zathra emerged like a storm given flesh, her armor glowing with a light Eli had never seen before, her forearms extended with blades in each hand, and her eyes burned with a fury that made the assassin's grip falter for just a moment. That moment was enough. She crossed the distance between them in a single leap, and her blade took the assassin's head clean off, the body dropping Eli as it fell. And she caught him before he hit the ground. The whole thing had taken less than 10 seconds. Eli gasped for air, his throat on fire and his vision still swimming. And he became aware that he was being held against something warm and bright, Sathra's chest armor, which was glowing like a star and pulsing with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. "Foolish," she hissed. But her voice was shaking. "Incredibly foolish. You could have died. You should have died. What were you thinking?" "Didn't though," Eli managed to rasp, and then he laughed. A wet, broken sound that hurt his ruined throat but felt necessary somehow. "This is not funny," Sathra snarled, but she did not let go of him. "You are a human. You have no armor, no weapons, no training. What made you think you could fight karate assassins?" "Didn't think," Eli admitted. "Just acted. Heard them coming for you and something in me wouldn't let me stay hidden." She stared at him, and he saw confusion in her eyes. Confusion and something else. Something that looked like it might be fear, but not fear of him. Fear of something else entirely. "You are bleeding," she said, her voice softer now. "I know. You saved my life. I know that too." "Why?" she demanded. "I am not your clan, not your house. Not even your species. I am nothing to you. Why would you risk everything for me?" Eli looked up at her, at this fierce warrior who had been nothing but cold and harsh since the day they met, who had trusted him with her deepest shame and shared memories she had buried for years. And he realized that he did not have a logical answer. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I just knew I couldn't let you die. Not if there was anything I could do to stop it." She held his gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them. Something that neither of them could name but both of them felt then. She lifted him like he weighed nothing and carried him to the medical bay, shouting for medics in a voice that shook the walls. And she did not leave his side until his wounds were treated and his breathing was stable later. When the ship's security had taken away the bodies and the corridor had been cleaned of blood, Sathra returned to his bedside with a strange expression on her face. "The armor," she said quietly. "It healed." Eli blinked at her through the haze of painkillers, not understanding. "The crack," she explained, pressing a hand to her chest. "It closed completely. The cold spot, too. While I was fighting, while I was trying to reach you, the armor finished healing on its own." "That's good," Eli murmured. "That's really good. I do not understand," she said, and she sounded almost lost. "I have spent years trying to heal. You have spent months working on it, and it chose to heal now, in that moment." "Why, maybe," Eli said, his eyes growing heavy. Maybe it finally had something worth healing for. She was silent for a long time, and the last thing Eli saw before sleep took him was her hand, scaled and clawed and capable of terrible violence. Resting gently over his own when he woke, she was still there. The weeks after the assassination attempt changed everything aboard the Void Serpent, and Eli found himself at the center of changes he had never expected and did not fully understand, The three assassins had been agents of House Velketh, a rival clan that had been seeking to destroy Saithra for years. The same house that had once bought the loyalty of her shield sister. And their failure had exposed a network of traitors that ran deeper than anyone had realized. Zethra hunted them down one by one. And when she was finished, her position was stronger than it had ever been, unquestioned and unassailable. The first blade, who had survived betrayal twice and emerged more dangerous each time, but that was not the change that mattered most to Elida. Change that mattered was the way she looked at him now. The way she sought him out, not just for armor repair, but for conversation, for company, for something that neither of them had words for. Karate High Council had taken notice of the human who had saved their first blade, and in a ceremony that Ailey still did not fully understand, they had offered him a title, Forge Hand to House Valkes, a position that had not existed in 300 years. It came with quarters near Saithra's own chambers, a workshop 10 times the size of Zolwan, and a status that made the other karate treat him with something almost like respected. Also came with politics, intrigue, and the certain knowledge that he had become a target himself, a piece on a board he barely understood. And after a week of formal dinners and suspicious glances from nobles who saw him as either a threat or a tool, Ale made his decision. He was packing his meager belongings when Saithra found him. She stood in the doorway of his quarters, like she had on that first night. But everything else was different now, her armor whole and gleaming, her posture relaxed in a way he had never seen before, her eyes holding something warm instead of cold. "You are leaving," she said. And it was not a question. I figured I'd outstayed my welcome. Eli replied without turning around. "The council gave me a fancy title, but we both know what I really am. A mechanic from a species that most of the galaxy considers primitive. And now that your armor is fixed, there is no reason for me to stay. You believe you were only useful for repairs. Wasn't I?" he asked, finally facing her. "I mean, that's why I'm here in the first place. That's the only reason any karate ever looked at me with anything other than contempt." Saithra stepped into the room, the door sliding closed behind her. And for a long moment she just looked at him with those copper eyes that he had learned to read over months of quiet evenings in his workshop. "You truly do not understand," she said softly. "Understand what?" "What you have done," she answered. "Not just for the armor, but for me. Do you know what it means for a karate to share memories of weakness, to admit damage, to sit in silence while foreign hands touch their most sacred bond?" I figured it was difficult. It was impossible, she said. Or it should have been. No karate has done such a thing in recorded history. We would rather die than show such vulnerability to an outsider. And yet I came to you night after night, and each time it became easier. Each time the shame faded a little more. She moved closer. And Eli held his ground, even though his heart was racing in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "You asked me once how I trusted you," Saithra continued. How a human had broken through defenses that had held against everything else. And I did not have an answer then, but I do now. "What is the answer?" Eli asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You never tried to be anything other than what you are," she said. "You never pretended to be a warrior, never tried to impress me with strength or skill. You were simply honest, simply kind, simply present. And those things are rarer in the universe than any weapon or armor." She was standing right in front of him now, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her healed chestplate, close enough that he could see the tiny scales around her eyes shift as her expression changed. "Stay," she said. And the word hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. "Commander," Eli began. "Saithra," she corrected him. "When we are alone, I would have you call me by my name." "Saithra," he repeated. And the name felt different in his mouth now, intimate in a way that titles could never be. "I am just a guy who fixes things. That is all I have ever been. I do not know how to be what you need." "You are exactly what I need," she said. And then she did something that would have been unthinkable weeks ago. Something that probably violated 100 karate customs and traditions. She took his hand in hers, her scaled fingers wrapping around his soft human skin, and she guided it to her chest plate, to the place where the crack had been. Where the cold spot had held for so long, the metal was warm beneath his palm, alive and pulsing with a light that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. And he felt something through that connection. Something vast and deep that might have been the armor's memory or might have been something else entirely. The armor has chosen, Saithra said, her voice low and soft. It chose you the moment you first touched it. I simply took longer to understand. What does that mean? Eli asked. What happens now? She leaned closer, her face inches from his, and he could see his own reflection in her molten copper eyes. A small, fragile human who had somehow become important to a creature of scales and fury. Now you keep working, she said, and there was a hint of a smile at the corners of her mouth. The armor is healed, but I am still learning, still growing, still changing, and I would have your hands guide me as they guided the metal. Her voice dropped even lower, warm and wanting. Go on, human, she whispered. Don't stop. And Eli, whose hands had mended what no one else could mend, who had spoken to living metal and heard its secrets, who had fought assassins with tools and survived against all odds, understood at last that he was not done. He would never be done, because this was not mending. It was a beginning, and the thing they were building together was something that had never existed before. Not in karate history, not in human history. Not anywhere in the vast, cold universe. His hands moved against her armor, feeling the warmth, the pulse, the life, and she leaned into his touch with a sound that was almost a sigh outside. The stars burned cold and distant. But here in this small room on an alien ship, something new was taking shape. Something born of broken things made whole. Of walls torn down and bridges built. Tile Vance had come to the Void Serpent as a prisoner in all but name. A useful tool to be discarded when his purpose was served. He stayed as something else entirely, and when the ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them both for whatever future awaited. Neither of them was alone anymore. That perhaps was the most human thing of all.